Greetings, everyone. My name is Sue Kessner. Thank you. I don't usually get an applause, that's for sure. I am co-chair of the Friends of the Library Programming Committee, and we welcome you to one of our Sunday afternoon programs. We have several interesting speakers throughout the year. We've had novelists, we've had heads of artistic associations, the Embrace Boston, we've had journalists, and today we have an artist. I do want to let you know that, and you'll see flyers around, that on June 6th, we will have another speaker. We'll have Emily Norton, Executive Director of the Charles River Watershed Association, speaking on the state of the Charles River. And for those of you who've lived here long enough, you know that the state of the Charles River has only improved greatly over the last several decades. So that meeting is the only one during the year that's held on a Thursday evening because it's our annual Friends of the Library meeting, a very brief business meeting, and the rest is really the speaker. Before I introduce our guest today, a few housekeeping notes. I already shared the most important one about the doors being open, but today the talk itself will take around 40 minutes. Please hold your questions till the very end, and I'll do my best imitation of Phil Donahue, if you remember that long ago, some of you, and run around with a microphone and get all of your questions. And I do want to take a minute to thank a few members of our committee. These programs take a lot of planning and a team, and in this particular case, I want to thank Carol Arbogast, Judy Sachs, Mimi Rovner, and John Lechner, as well as our terrific tech guys, Al and Mark. Thank you so much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker, Lisa Rosowsky. You know, finding good speakers, planning the program, all of that is great fun and rewarding in many ways. But when we have a native speaker to talk about, it makes it even better. Our guest speaker, Lisa Rosowsky, grew up in Needham. She attended the Needham Public Schools from kindergarten through high school, and her parents still live in the house that she grew up in. Lisa is a tenured professor at Mass College of Art and Design. She earned her AB at Harvard College and an MFA in graphic design from Yale University. Her mixed media work, which focuses on the Holocaust, on family trauma and memory, has been, and by the way, beyond that, many more contemporary social issues, has been exhibited nationally, and her artist books are in collections all over, in places like the Boston Public Library, Wellesley College, Stanford, Harvard, University of Vermont, and the Museum of Printing. I find Lisa's work absolutely fascinating and unique. Not only the subject matter is interesting, but her process for identifying issues and topics of personal interest, researching it, thinking through what the end result should look like so that she can share this with her audience. Ultimately, mastering all kinds of skills that are required to bring this to life. Needlework, woodwork, photography, electronics. You can see that in this piece that she'll talk about later on the floor in the front. Today we're going to learn more about her processes. We're going to see photos of many of her works. And should you be interested, we have the catalogs from a recent exhibit that she did at the Danforth Museum. It was last year. They cost $60, and so if you have a personal check or cash, we can accommodate you at the desk there. And now, Lisa.
Okay. All right, can everybody hear me? Awesome, that's great. Okay, so yes, I'm very happy to be here. I did grow up in Needham. I wanted to say, you know, the focus of my talk is about research and the role of research in creating my art. But my research journey really started here in the Needham Public Library, because when I was growing up, my family had the requisite set of encyclopedias that stopped after World War II. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time here at the library. And I will never forget being in the children's room, if you remember, with the green dinosaur. I don't know that I'm sure that's long gone, but once I finished reading everything in the children's room, I was given permission to go to the adult library. And I remember like it was yesterday, going up this very narrow, dark set of stairs and emerging in the adult library. And for this little Jewish kid, it was like a cathedral. It was just, full of sun and the big Palladian windows and everything. So this place is holy ground for me, and I'm very, very pleased to be back with you. So here we go. Thank you. Hello, my name is Lisa Rosowsky, and I'm an artist. And this talk, I'm going to tell a little bit about the art of storytelling, and for me, the role of research in creating my art. So if you don't happen to know any visual artists personally, this might be what you think of when you think of an artist. This sort of tortured soul alone in the studio, dredging his mind for inspiration as he transforms the pain of his own life into visual format. So, however, this is actually what my studio looks like. Doesn't look like that at all. On the other hand, it doesn't always usually look this clean. This is more like what it looks like day to day, full of junk, full of stuff. But I'm very lucky to be able to now have a studio in my own home. Sort of the whole first floor is my studio, and it opens out onto the garden and the patio, which is great. I have a dye sink out there, so I can, in the nice weather, I can go and dye out in my yard and all that stuff. So that's one place where I do my work. But my workspace can also look like this, or like this. And my research also involves some travel, if I'm lucky, and what I call field work. So this is me last summer doing some work in the northeast of France. And interviewing, I was during that trip as well. A lot of my research takes the form of interviewing people who were witnesses to history that I did not myself witness. And it's important to get their words and their take on things while they're still around. Also traveling to meet and learn from artisans in other countries, like this fourth-generation double ikat weaver in Japan, who was showing my very dear friend Elizabeth and I some dried indigo plants. And we got to visit his studio and learn about a process that had been passed down for literally 150 years or more. And that was an amazing piece of research. In order to make the work that I make, I've had to learn to do, as Sue mentioned, a lot of different things. So I've had to learn how to embroider, how to quilt, how to dye fabric, how to do basic electronics, which is I'm not at all native to. I've had to learn to construct with wood, to cast using various materials, and many other techniques depending on the needs of each project. So I do learn new skills with almost every project I begin. I call myself media agnostic because instead of becoming an expert in any one medium or material, I choose the right media and material for the message that I want to get across, and then I just figure out how to work with it. So I'm a huge user of YouTube because there are anything you ever want to learn is on YouTube, and if you have basic skills, you can go quite far using, piggyback on the experts above you. So now that you know a little bit about me and where I work, I'm going to show you some of my work. This was one of my earliest pieces. It's called The Angel of Auschwitz. My father was a so-called hidden child who was only 6 years old when both of his parents were arrested in the Great Roundup in occupied Paris in 1942. They were killed, along with 4 out of his mother's 11 siblings, plus multiple spouses and children. For the first part of my artistic journey, I focused my work on this family history and trauma. And I do want to say that I was not trained as a fine artist. I was actually trained as a designer, which is very different. And it was only when I turned 35 years old and I had 2 young children and just starting school that I decided it was kind of time to see if what I thought I could do. And so I took advantage of my very first sabbatical, which coincided with when one child was in preschool and the other was in kindergarten, and went into this big empty factory studio and began to make work like my life depended on it. Like I said, without training, it was just a lot of trial and error, but I worked in that studio for 7 years by myself without really showing anybody anything, until I finally thought maybe I have something worthwhile to show. So this was probably the first or second piece that I made, and it was important to me to be able to do this work because my father had been and remains very silent about what happened to his family. So it was, I felt it was on me to kind of do the work, to use my talents to wrestle with the silence and to make some sense out of the story. I will say that I never claimed to be speaking for anyone but myself, and so that these are family stories, but inevitably they're filtered through me. And there's a close-up of the angel. What you can't see is that in the wings, which are 14 feet wide, in the barbed wire it says Tod macht frei, which in German means death will make you free. So. This is another piece that relied a lot on research, and it's the story that tells, it's the story of the Vélodrome d'Hiver, which was a bicycle racing stadium in Paris, where thousands of Parisian Jews were interned for many days after their arrests, including my grandparents. There was little food or water, very poor sanitation, but this was kind of a holding place for Jews who were arrested and being sent on to points east, including Auschwitz. So what I found in the course of researching this velodrome was this very rare image taken of the Jewish prisoners who were sitting. You can see them sitting on the raked seating of the stadium with their few belongings and their families, and waiting to see if what was going to happen. They were not told. So this was one scene, and then the other side of this quilt. So this is a two-sided quilt. You can walk around it, and it's maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, and it's sandwiched between glass. So this is actually a hole in the quilt. You can see right through it. So it is a double-sided quilt, which isn't very common. And this is a street scene in Paris. Let me go back. This was a street scene in Paris. This was, weekend shopping, bustling Paris during the German occupation. So you can actually see there are some people wearing the Jewish stars and some people who are not. But this was another image that was taken during the occupation. A photographer had been given very rare at the time German Agfa color film. If you can, you don't see color photographs so often from here. But it was propaganda. He was hired by a German magazine to photograph the city under occupation, so that people knew that Paris, the city of light, was still fine and thriving and whatever. So it really was propaganda. So I wanted to make a piece that showed two sides of the same city at the same time. This is Paris. This velodrome is in the center of Paris, very close to here. So it was remarkable to me that people could go about their business while thousands and thousands of people were being held prisoner in this velodrome. So the woman, the shopper who was here, was removed. There's now this window, and I don't know if you can see her shoe, but she's right there. So she's the witness that's been taken from one side, and she is bearing witness to what's happening in the city on the other side. If you're wondering what is surrounding it, there is a very sheer border around this piece, and you can see that there are letters, there's some Vichy currency in there, but the letters are actually facsimiles of letters that were from Jewish prisoners who were on the trains on the way to Auschwitz. They would take any paper they had and scribble letters and throw them out the train windows in the hopes that people walking by the tracks would pick them up and deliver them. And many of them were delivered that way by well-intentioned people. But I thought that was just heartbreaking. And so those are kind of surrounding on both sides. As Sue mentioned, in recent years, I've widened my circle of interest because it's clear, I think, to me as to most people that what's happening in our country and in Europe bears some resemblance to what was happening before the Holocaust. And I have, of course, a very attuned ear to what's happening. And there are conditions in the world that are very concerning to me. So around 2015, you may remember, there was a huge influx of refugees from Syria, and a lot of them were fleeing, war in Syria, and they took to the Mediterranean Sea on these incredibly unseaworthy crafts, and they fled. Obviously, they would never choose to do that unless their situation was incredibly dire at home. So they took the risk with their families and their loved ones, and they set out to sea, and many, many thousands of them lost their lives at sea in a hope to make it to Europe. So I was very sad about that and wanted to make a piece about it. So this is a piece called "They Come by Water." And it came out of my despair at how many people had lost their lives and continue to do so if you keep your eye on the news. But what I want you to see is that in the foam of the water, it actually looks like this. Yeah, so these are, well, you can see what they are. They're people, and there's luggage in there and all sorts of other things that become flotsam in the water. And later I'll show you how that was made using a laser cutter. I made this piece, which is about 10 feet tall, and it's called My America, in response to the sharp increase in hate crimes and hateful rhetoric in the years following the 2016 election. At the time, I think a lot of us, including many artists that I've spoken with, were a little bit paralyzed because it was just unbelievable what was going on. So I could not make this piece until 2020. It took 4 years to kind of finally unparalyze myself to make this piece, but those 4 years had made me see our country in a way that I couldn't unsee once we saw what was underneath there. So this is a close-up of the piece. You can see that's a handmade American flag. Sometimes people say, "Oh, did you change a flag?" No, that's made by hand. And anyway, that's that piece. So a lot of pieces come out of a long period of research. This did not. This was a really quick one that I made in my sketchbook, and I was like, I just have to make it. I was really frustrated, as I'm sure some of you as well have been. So this one is called "Been There," and it's exactly what it looks like. It's gold trash cans with a lot of bling around them, a lot of rhinestones and beautiful tassels and everything like that, with the hand-painted thoughts and prayers on it. So that was no research needed for that one. Many of the pieces I make are narrative in some way. They tell stories using images and sometimes type or text in ways that can be more powerful than words alone. And that's where research comes in. So this piece is called "They Come for the Dead Before They Come for the Living." And this was my response to a radical increase in the desecration of Jewish graves, gravestones, not only in the US but also in Europe over the last years. And to me, it seemed that the desecration of graves is really a message of hate to the living. They're destroying things that belong with the dead as a message of hate to the living. So what this piece is also, it's about 10 feet by 5 feet, and this comes out of another piece of research. I was in Paris at the anniversary of the 70th anniversary of the Auschwitz, and I took a train from Paris to Krakow. So I wanted to retrace my grandparents' train trip. It was a 24-hour horrible train trip that landed me in Krakow. So I did spend some time in Krakow walking around, and I found the old Jewish cemetery there. And I was struck by this wall that surrounded the cemetery, and it was a wall that was entirely built of fragments of Jewish headstones. And the story behind it is this, that when the Germans occupied the city, one of the first things they would do, and they would do this in most cities because it was so demoralizing, was they would go and they would break up the headstones in the Jewish cemeteries. I mean, it's again, this message. So they did that, and then the Poles would come out, and the Polish people, and they would take the fragments during wartime, and they would use them for things like stepping stones in front of their houses, or stair steps, things like that. They would actually use them that way. So after the war was over, and the city was putting itself back together, people very quietly began to return the fragments to the cemetery. But of course, it was like a crazy jigsaw puzzle. There was no way to put the stones back together again. So what they did instead was they made this wall surrounding the cemetery out of the tens of thousands of fragmented stones. And I thought it was so moving and so beautiful, and such a really interesting response to the story that I took a photo of it. And I held on to that photo for years until I was making this piece, and I thought, that's why I have the photo. So what you see here is, this is my photo that's been printed onto fabric, and around every stone is hand quilted, so that's a lot of hand quilting. And then on many of the stones are these hand embroidered. You can see them closely in the catalog, but these hand embroidered statistics from the United States and from various cities in Europe, documenting different significant desecrations in Jewish cemeteries. How many stones, what city it was done in, and the year. So that's what this is about. And then the lichen is just hand-dyed vintage doilies, because there was lichen on the stone. So that's what this piece is. Art tells stories. Stories need context. And context requires research. So that's how research plays in for me. So I'm going to share a couple of stories with you. The first one I'm going to share is about Levitan. And this piece is called Levitan. So this is the actual piece here. So what was Levitan? Well, I was reading a book of historical fiction, as I am wont to do, some years ago, when I came across a reference to this word I didn't know, this place I didn't know, called Levitan. And I had no idea what that was, so of course I looked it up. And it turned out that in the 10th arrondissement of Paris, there was a department store called Levitan that specialized in furniture and opened in the 1930s. It was Jewish-owned by a Jewish man named Wolf Levitan. So this was an ad in its heyday for this department store. It was the Jordan's furniture of its day. And they had all sorts of gimmicks. These are ads for it that I found. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful space. It had 4 floors, very chic. You can see the dining sets. So then the German occupation came, and the Mobile Action was a Nazi looting organization, part of the, and forgive me, I don't speak German, but as part of the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR. Notably, however, when the Jews were arrested during the Great Roundup of 1942, it was French-owned moving companies that took the inventory. So what would happen would be the Jewish family would be arrested. They would, the address was clearly marked down. French moving companies like this one would go in the next day, and they would take a very careful inventory of everything that was in there, and then all of that stuff was moved out. Where was it moved? The Germans requisitioned Levitan, and they turned it into a department store, a private department store where German officers could shop for their wives back home. So this became a department store for looted goods. It's fascinating to me. And what you can see here is an officer shopping. You can see some crates of straw. I'm not sure, maybe things are being uncrated right here. Well, the first 3 floors were stocked with all sorts of household goods. The 4th floor was reserved for housing, and it housed Jewish prisoners who were made to work there. So you can see some of the goods here. When I did the research, I came across an archive in Berlin that had this incredible collection of photographs. So that's how I was able to find these. So those prisoners with special skills like clock repair or piano tuning, they were taken from various camps to do this. So I imagine it was maybe a bit of a plum job, and probably also an improvement in living conditions. So here you can see somebody repairing things here. And you can see a woman testing light bulbs because nothing was too small to take. They took light bulbs, they took clothes hangers. You have to remember that Germany was at war as well, and so there were lots of deprivations back home in Germany. So they took everything because every type of good was needed back in Germany too. So this is a work in progress. You can see me doing some embroidery. In 1942, the M Action looted approximately 70,000 homes, 70,000 homes, just in 1942, of French, Belgian, and Dutch Jews, 38,000 of them in Paris alone. My research revealed unthinkable quantities of looted goods, enough in just 1 month to fill almost 27,000 railroad cars bound for Germany. So again, thanks to research, I was able to find that the Germans were, you have to give them credit, they were very good at keeping records. And you can find records of everything. So once the research was done, I had a vision of a dollhouse with rooms that each had a purpose, as our own homes do. There's a nursery, a kitchen, a music room, and each one has a photo from wartime Levitan stocked with stolen goods. So you can see these are kitchen linens, just stacks and stacks of dish towels, toys, radios, old radios. This woman is sorting through fur pieces, and kitchen goods. And then the lit photos are photos of those rooms being used before the war, so that you can see how the rooms were enjoyed and then that they take their place in the room. And then on either side, here you can read more about the looting, and then on the other side are just the statistics that you saw, the embroidery. So here you can see a family enjoying their space with the linens before the war. And then thinking about all of those things in those rooms being sent on to be in German households. I've even included these charming photos of my grandparents cooking together in their pre-war apartment as an homage to my family. As with so many of the projects I work on, Levitan began with coming across a random reference and following up out of curiosity. And after the talk is over, please do come up and take a look at the piece up close yourself. The next piece I'd like to tell you a story about is a piece called The Missing. Around 2015, I was searching for information on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's website when I came across this Remember Me project. It was an initiative that they had just launched. And they had a mission to identify some of the children who were displaced by the war, who had been photographed by relief agencies. So they had this database full of these images of children who had been photographed, and they were hoping that there was somebody left alive in the world who could help identify these children. So in central locations in Paris, such as the Hotel Lutetia, survivors posted on and checked bulletin boards for lost family members. At the same time, all across Europe, immediately after the war, children like Sinead here posed for portraits just like this, holding slates with their names written on them, and the images were distributed in the hope that someone was left alive to identify them. So I was intrigued and a little heartbroken, and I reached out to the museum to ask if they would give me access to the database of these portraits for a project, and somewhat to my surprise, they agreed, and they gave me access to the database. And this is what came out of it. This is the piece called The Missing. It's very large. In the middle, you can see a middle-class Jewish family portrait. And as you get closer, you begin to see that the portrait is made up of the portraits of all of these children, like this. Thousands of them, from teenagers and children to babies still in their cribs. Although the photo mosaic was digitally created using special software, the entire piece was hand-channel quilted, which means that my hands touched each and every child's image at least once on this piece. And you can see for this next picture, you can see for scale in my old studio, the dress form gives you an idea of the size of this. And now I'm going to do something I have never done in all of my artist talks. I'm actually going to let you peek into my sketchbooks. It's very scary. I keep sketchbooks like most artists. I have dozens of them. They're scattered in every room of the house. I've got old ones that are filled up that I just put on my bookcase. I have sketchbooks. I write in them. I keep track of freelance projects. I put everything in them, so they're not all drawings, but certainly they are some. So things that happen in the world hit me hard. And when they do, when they really start to weigh on me, I will sketch to try to communicate some essential truth of how I feel. It's not unusual, though, for sketches to appear in my sketchbooks for 1, 2, 3, or even more years before I actually make the piece, if it ever gets made. So for me, if something comes up over and over again, as you can see here, these were the sketches that eventually led to the My America piece. You can see me trying to work it out, trying to figure out what I want to say. Yeah, they're not beautiful drawings, they're simply thinking on paper. Often I find myself drawing variations of the same essential gesture again and again, and again, and again, over a long period of time before I understand what I want to make and how to make it. So do you recognize what these are? That's from the water piece. They came from by water with the people in the surf. So this is me thinking and making sense of the news. This is, I wanted you to see one of the interesting processes I make use of. This is a laser cutter, and this is me prototyping the lace. So that's actually being laser cut. I tried many different fabrics. It actually took me several years to make this piece because of all the R&D that went into it. A laser cutter, for example, I prefer to work with natural fabrics like silk and cotton, but when you laser cut something very fine on those fabrics, it just shreds, it frays. So I had to use something that was like a nylon or a polyester where the heat of the laser would actually seal the cut instantly so I could get that fine lace. So there was a lot of trial and error. I have a bag full of all of these attempts. But when it came time to actually create it, I didn't have access to a laser cutter as big as I needed, so I actually had to send this out to be done. But I did do the prototyping myself. And that became this. It's not easy to make work the way that I do. Aside from all the research, I work slowly. I test out a lot of techniques and materials. I'm also a full-time college professor and currently chairperson of the department, so I have other stuff to do. So it takes time, and I give myself the time to do that. Anyone here who's an artist knows how much time is spent worrying and doubting that what you're working on at any given time is any good. But But to me, and this, what you're seeing here is when I did make that trip to Auschwitz. I put this stone, I brought the stone all the way with me and put down the stone on the tracks. And when I got home, I talked with my father, who had made the trip a decade before, and it turns out that he had done the same thing. Without us knowing, we had both put a stone in memory of our families down on the tracks. So I thought that was a good way to end this. So there's a lot behind it, as you can see, and research is an incredibly important part of my process. So it takes time, but to me, it's still the best way I know how to tell stories. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I feel like we had a personal, really intimate tour of your head, you know, and of your thinking. Yeah, no, for better. Yeah. Now, any questions? I was curious, just to start it, that first piece of art that you showed, there were the letters that were thrown out the windows. How did you get copies of those?
Yeah, I'll be back here because you can hear me. There is I have a large library of books about the Holocaust, as you can imagine. And there was a book that I found online that I ordered called Letters from Drancy. It's in French, but I was able to pick my way through it. And they actually reproduced a lot of the facsimiles of the letters.
Interesting. Yeah. All right, now I'd like to open it up to the room. Yeah, well, Robert. Yeah. To really speak right in.
That was really fascinating, and I have a family history. Not exactly the same, but it certainly killed my grandparents were killed in Buchenwald and Auschwitz. I recently saw The Zone of Interest.
I haven't seen it.
And if you haven't seen it, you should. It's brilliant, and they make a lot of the art of sound in this film. In fact, I think it won the Sound Oscar. And I was just wondering if you've ever thought of incorporating sound into your art.
I have. In fact, I'll be working up in Haystack, which if you're an artist, you know Haystack is a wonderful place of residency up on Deer Isle, Maine. And I specifically will be going there for 2 weeks in August to work on what they're calling electronic textiles, which will allow me to learn more about how to incorporate sound, motion, and light into my work. So yes, I'm hoping very much to do that.
All right, while I'm here, take off your mask.
Okay. We saw your exhibit at the Danforth Museum. It was wonderful. And it's so complex because it's so multimedia, I call it. I don't know if that's the right term.
It's mixed media. But
mixed media, that's what I meant to say, yes. How do you decide which materials to use for a given project?
Okay. It's a great question. For me, the message comes first, and then I have what I call, without knowing specifically why I call it the gesture. So for me, the message comes first. What do I want to say? What is my attitude towards it? And then the sketching reveals the gesture. So for me, the gesture of the They Come By Water piece is the bodies in the water. And the gesture of the piece with the headstones is going to be, you know, the wall and the fact that I can pick out certain stones to honor certain desecrations. And then it's simply a question of, oftentimes it will just appear in my mind, it has to be this. And then the little devil on my shoulder will say, but you don't know how to weld. And I'll be like, but I can learn how to weld. That's okay, it's fine. You know, so for me, and this is what I often will try to teach my students, which is the concept is first. That will bring about an idea, and the idea will suggest a certain format. And for me, then the format has to be what I call a hand and glove fit for the idea, which has to be a hand and glove fit for the concept. If all of those things come together as they should, it's a seamless read. Everybody gets it, and that's what yeah.
Okay, so yeah, come here.
I was wondering where your final works, your pieces of art, end up. Are they, because they're not typically in someone's home, but they belong in certain collections, so...
They end up, I mean, they're shown in museums. It's museum work rather than gallery work because it's really not for sale. It would be for sale if anybody wanted it, but nobody
Right.
wants my work. Nobody wants my work in their house. I understand
Right.
that. So my hope is that someday a museum will purchase some of the
Right.
work, because otherwise it's in my
know.
storage unit. Yeah.
Right. So is the museum in New York, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, for example, did they purchase your piece based on their database of photos?
Oh, that was the U.S. Holocaust Museum.
Right. Oh,
They
right.
did not. The thing with many Holocaust museums is they have a policy
Oh, I have
not
one
to
Sorry.
own or show contemporary work. They tend but I'm going to pitch them hard, because if anybody should have it, even in their corporate offices or something, they really need to have it. I'm
Right.
going to pitch that, because I would
Right.
very much like that to end up there.
Right. I have one more. During COVID, I started reading Holocaust literature, but specifically about France, because I didn't know much about what had occurred in France. And one of the books I read was Sarah's Key.
Yeah, I've read that too, yeah.
Which is so interesting because the main character is a journalist, and she ends up being assigned to write the article on the anniversary date of the gathering or the arresting of all the Jews, and they're brought to the Velodrome in
Yes.
Paris, and it ends up changing her life and so on. So I was thinking of your artwork, and I didn't get to see the exhibit at the Danforth, but I was wondering, have you ever thought of including some of the books that have led you to the stories that you're telling?
No, but having a reading list to accompany an exhibition was a great idea. I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're there? Okay. Let me start here, and then I'll go back there, Nancy. Just talk right into it.
Thank you. I was curious to know what material, the angel piece that you showed first, what that was made from?
Okay, so the angel, it has inside it has a wooden frame. The body itself is actually plaster, cast plaster and molded plaster. The face is plaster as well. The wings are barbed wire, and the dress is silk.
Okay.
You mentioned, I'm sorry. You mentioned that your father was 6 years old and he was hidden. And I'm very curious because I think your artwork is amazing and very moving, but what happened to your dad? Do you know? Or can you share that?
What happened to my dad? Well,
How he was hidden?
Yeah, he was, yeah. The short version is that his parents were given one night's warning. Basically, the police, the French police were the ones that were coming around doing the arresting. And they came, but his mother and he were not at home. Father was at work, presumably. They were at a doctor's appointment, at her doctor's appointment. And when they came back in, the police were still there, and the concierge pulled them into her apartment in the first floor and said, "Don't go up, don't go up." So she held on to them until the police came down and said, "Well, we'll be back tomorrow for the family," so that they knew that they had that one night's warning. So my father's father arranged for his boss to make arrangements, who was not Jewish, to make arrangements to send my father into hiding. So he was very typical. He was put for a little while in a Catholic school. He was moved around. He was sent to a farm for a little while. And eventually he went down to Pau, which is in the south of France, very south of France, where he met up with cousins and an aunt and uncle, and they were in hiding. So they held on to him until he was 10, and the war was over. And then he came over on a ship to the United States. He was met by another aunt in New York, but they had instructions to send him off to California to be raised by yet another aunt. It was a huge family. So he ended up in California and was raised by an aunt and uncle there.
Wow.
And he's still very much alive. He just can't be here today, but hopefully he'll be able to
So we're
see
going to
this
show him the
broadcast.
video. This has been videotaped, so he'll be able to see it on the either the Needham channel or the YouTube, the library YouTube channel.
Your angel is unbelievable. But the hands, I'm wondering, what is it holding, a sphere or something? Or
No,
just
it holds nothing. It's a bit of a gesture of benediction.
okay.
Yeah,
I was wondering what that meant.
yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Or that. Is your hand? Yeah, okay. Just hold it out for me.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
My question is, how do you discuss some of this with your students in the classroom?
It's fascinating. I have one of my students here today.
One of the
Raise your
students
hand.
is here in the same row, but I don't know who.
But I don't teach this. Remarkably, I was trained as a designer, as a graphic designer, as a typographer. That's what I teach. My colleagues know this is a separate thing. So I'm a sort of secret fine artist. It's not what I teach. Yeah.
Now, what fascinates me is I'm not sure if you're familiar with Steve Feller's work on the money that they've used to use as a ploy. I'm not sure if you're aware of that fascinating research book. You may be.
Are you talking about Vichy money or something else?
No, it has to do with silent witnesses, the civilian camp money of World War II.
Oh, how interesting. They had their own unit of currency.
Yes,
Yeah, no, I'm not
and
familiar
Steve Feller, who's a professor of physics at College in Iowa, but his daughter is at MIT, Ray Feller. They wrote this book
How do
maybe
you spell
about,
the last name?
the title of it is Silent Witnesses.
Okay,
Witnesses, and it's civilian camp money
okay.
of World War II. Absolutely, your work falls in line with quite a bit of that
Yeah.
period, especially the letters.
Thank you. I'm really fascinated by currency because one of my current obsessions is the forged currency and forged documents during the war. And that was the purpose of my trip into France this past summer, was to go and look at the town that put up thousands of Jews on their way to try to go to Switzerland. And a forger whose name was Oscar Rosowsky, who stayed there and forged papers so that people could pass. So I went to the town, the very small town, to look at that. Yeah.
Well, we have one question here.
So I was about to ask a question about how much your process and your work here features in the world of education. And when you said they're separate worlds, maybe it's not my place to say this, but it feels like a missed opportunity because there's, I wonder what your student thinks, but it just makes me think there's so many vehicles, there's so many strategies that you have modeled here for us that
Yes.
budding artists could benefit from. So
Yeah, thank you.
that's just a thought. And the other question is just a curiosity, if you've exhibited outside of America.
I have not yet. I would love to. I would love to show in France,
That's
for
what
example.
I was thinking.
Yeah,
There's so
yeah.
much.
Here. Here you go.
You had two children through all this process. How do they fit into this, and how have they observed it, and how do you talk to them
What
about
a great
it?
question. Yeah, they were so young when I started. I really did start to do this work to avoid passing on the sort of secondhand trauma that I felt I received as a child. Hopefully, you can never, I mean, they're going to have their own stuff, right? But I felt I needed to discharge it in some way. So they literally grew up come into my studio sometimes and seeing what I was work on, and they're 20, almost 28 and 25 now, and the younger one calls it Mama's sad arts and crafts. You know, she calls it my sad arts and crafts. So, you know, to them it's just normal, and we roll our eyes over it. But yeah.
But your remarkable ability to absorb new skills, that's an interesting thing for a child to see.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. And I hope it's okay to say that I think my children both have some of that as well. They're really both very good about. If there's one thing I hope that I passed along to them, it's my curiosity, and that's my best legacy, I think.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Could you talk about funding for the arts? How do you fund your projects? Are you able to do it because you're a professor?
If I could turn my pockets in, I don't have pockets, but I would turn them out if I had them. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't gamble. Everything I make goes into my artwork. I've had a couple of small grants. Mostly I just use them for travel, but this is what I choose to spend my money on. I could not could not afford to make it if I didn't have a full-time professor salary. I'm a tenured professor, so I have a decent income, but that's where the money goes, yeah.
Any other questions? While you're thinking, I have one. When you and I talked, you didn't mention it today, but you talked about, as I recall, a pair of gloves that your great aunt maybe gave you, and you incorporated into work.
Sure. That literally was the very first piece that I made when I rented that studio space and walked into this empty space. My great aunt was the one who raised my father, she and my great uncle. And when she died at the age of 101, she gave me a bunch of wonderful things. She knew I loved clothing, and especially vintage clothing. So she bequeathed me her collection of gloves because they lived in Beverly Hills. They lived quite a nice lifestyle, and I had gloves of, short, long, opera length, all sorts of gloves. And so, what am I going to do with gloves? But that became the impetus for the first piece that I made called the Wrightsons. And the Wrightsons was that family of 11 children, of whom half were killed in the war. And so you can see that if you go on my website, you can see what happened to the gloves. I ended up incorporating them into a quilt. Again, that was my first piece, and they were semi-sheer panels, and you could see the gloves through some of the squares behind the images of the family, and the white gloves indicated who survived the war, and the black gloves indicated who were killed in the war, and so that's how I ended up using the gloves.
I can't resist, as a librarian, mentioning the book The Hare with Amber Eyes. Have you read that, many of you?
Yes.
H-A-R.
That's okay, yeah.
So that started with those little Nitsuki at the end of the obi, Japanese obis, and became a whole incredible story. And I urge you to read it.
Yeah, I have.
The Hare, H-A-R-E, Hare with Amber Eyes. It's a short,
wonderful book. Yeah.
Here, one more question, sure. You have time?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm not going anywhere.
I think you would be interested in Zone of Interest because one of the scenes in the movie is the wife of the commander receives clothes that were confiscated from the Jewish prisoners, and they're the nice clothes, and you see her trying on a fur coat.
Yeah.
But it turned out that of all the clothes they took from the prisoners, they removed the buttons. For some reason, the buttons were viewed as like too personal, and it's a strange anecdote of why the buttons had to be removed. Like the Germans didn't, for some reason, want to be touched by the buttons, and so it sounds like something.
That's a fascinating fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway. Oh, sure.
Hi, Lisa. I worked with your mother for many years, Earlene, right? And so I just know your mother was a wonderful therapist and creative and an artist and dramatic, and your father a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're wondering how Lisa got to be so brilliant and versatile, and I just hearing what you're talking about and how deeply you go into the subject matter and then come up with all different ways to express it. And it's just wonderful to see you, and I so appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Okay, one more question. I was going to say that's a wonderful way to end it, but now we have a new wonderful way to end this discussion.
Even more wonderful way to end it. Thank you, Lisa. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the process of your work, please. How many pieces do you work on at one time? How long does it take you to do a piece? What are you working on? You mentioned the thing in Maine. Other than that, what are you working on? And in general, where do you get your ideas? You just sort of get them from the world around you? Any particular place you get them?
Yeah, okay, I'll try to address that in order. So how long the piece takes, it depends. A sort of a quick one, like the one with the garbage cans, might take a couple of weeks, because that's fairly easy. Most of them will take at least 9 months. Because it's slow, it's a lot of handwork, it's slow. I've worked on pieces for a year before. You just do what you do, and you work on them a little bit at a time. Was that, and the other thing, what I'm working on?
How many pieces do you work on?
I generally work on one piece at a time. I have to say, I multitask in life, but I don't multitask in my work. I really focus hard on one thing at a time. As for what I'm working on right now, I generally don't like to talk about what I'm working on now because it feels really fragile. It feels like this little egg thing that I don't want to expose until it's open. But I am really I'm going to do a residency in New Hampshire working on something called the risograph, which is a very special type of printer, and hoping to make a new artist's book about the forgery, the research from that. So that will come out of that, and then going to Maine to Haystack to just learn new skills. And I have the germ of something that I would love to be able to do with that, but I'll wait until I know what I'm doing.
Do you just get your ideas from anywhere, or do you generally have a particular source?
I'm an avid reader. I've got books in every room that I'm reading. I'm an avid listener to public radio. I can't tell you how many little facts that I've heard on public radio that have led me down the rabbit hole to a book or an author or whatever. So, and then just keeping my ears open, as I'm sure everybody does, for what feels wrong in the world to me.
Oh, we have another question. You have one? Oh.
To follow up, do you ever go back to a work that you've created in earlier years, or it just...
No.
No.
I spend so much time with them. I can't go back.
So you feel it's finished at that point?
It's
There's
finished. Now, that's not to say that I don't have things that I've started that I've never finished, because that hand in glove isn't right. There's a problem somewhere, and I know it very quickly, and I'll set it aside. And maybe I'll cannibalize the piece for something at some. But if the gesture is wrong, it'll never see the light of day.
Well, join me in thanking Lisa. Thank you.